On the afternoon of 24 August 1909, on the lawn of Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, the camera opens on a row of white-gloved hands resting on gilt chair arms. Porcelain cups circle slowly on saucers stamped with a small radical legend, "Votes for Women." Beyond the balustrade, the Atlantic light makes a shimmer of parasols and plumed hats. 600 guests drawn less by politics than by curiosity about Mrs. O.H.P. Belmont's fabled cottage. At the top of the terrace steps stands Alva Belmont, born Alva Vanderbilt, adjusting the fingers of one glove as if steadying herself before a ball. A New York Times notice will record this as a suffrage meeting under the auspices of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. A photograph captioned, "Woman Suffrage Gathering at Newport Marble House," will freeze the moment for the archives. She lifts her chin, the posture drilled into her decades earlier for drawing rooms and court presentations, and begins to speak. The ritual is the same: afternoon tea, careful seating, controlled applause, but the subject is no longer the 400. It is power. By the gray morning of 6 November 1895, St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue was thick with veils and diamonds. Inside, Consuelo Vanderbilt, 19, walks toward the altar to marry Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough. The rustle of silk, the glare of gaslight on gilt, and the murmur of society columnists gathering material for the next day's papers form the soundtrack. In later accounts, Consuelo will recall that she had secretly pledged herself to another man, and that her mother had warned she would not hesitate to shoot him rather than see the match thwarted, a line preserved in memoir and commentary on the marriage. The threat never appears in the wedding write-ups. There, the bride is only radiant. In a side pew, Alva Vanderbilt smooths the pearl buttons of her gloves, a gesture of composure. For her, this is not only a wedding, but a settlement, the union of railroad millions with Blenheim's crumbling grandeur, a consummation of the dollar princess system that has become a feature of the 1890s transatlantic elite. Outside, reporters note the blocked traffic and the crowd pressing against police lines. Inside, there is no mention of the tears Consuelo would later admit she shed all the way to the church. The public record shows perfection. The private record remembers pressure. In the photographs, the gloves are immaculate. In memoirs, the cost of wearing them begins to appear. 14 months earlier, in December 1894, New York newspapers quietly noted that Mrs. W.K. Vanderbilt has filed for divorce, an almost unthinkable act among the upper class. In the offices of her attorneys, on a cold midwinter day, we can imagine the rustle of heavy morning silk, the scratch of fountain pens on legal paper, the scent of coal smoke from Fifth Avenue drifting through the window. The official record is dry. A suit alleging adultery, no-fault divorce not yet possible. A later New York Times front page in March 1896 will summarize the outcome in a blunt headline: W.K. Vanderbilt loses, his wife gets an absolute divorce and custody of children. She is allowed to marry again. The social commentary, recorded in society columns and private letters, is more cutting. Divorce is described as a death sentence in retrospectives of the case. Among the 400, it is read as a declaration of war. The young women watching, debutantes, cousins, even Consuelo, see something precise: a woman using the machinery of law in a world that taught them to use only smiles and silence. The gesture of adjusting a glove begins to look less like vanity and more like armor. When the court grants Alva the right to marry again, it also grants her something harder to measure: precedent. By the summer of 1893, Marble House on Bellevue Avenue in Newport was complete. A limestone shell filled with gilded plaster, silk damask, and more than 500,000 cubic feet of marble. Built between 1888 and 1892 as a birthday gift from William K. Vanderbilt to Alva, the house is both tribute and instrument, a Versailles-inspired stage set for the social ascent she has choreographed. On its terraces, girls like Consuelo learn posture by walking the balustrades, books balanced on their heads. Their governesses note hours of French conversation and piano practice in schoolroom records. etiquette manuals in Alva's library prescribe the correct number of calling cards to leave and the precise wording of a refusal. When Oliver Belmont dies suddenly in 1908, leaving Alva a widow once more, Marble House changes meaning. The receipts and architectural plans do not show grief, but a later suffrage historian will note that it is after this loss that she plunged into the campaign for women's suffrage, reopening the house as a public venue. The same staircase that once trained debutantes for court will now train them to address crowds. The same gloved hand that received calling cards will soon pass out suffrage pamphlets. The architecture of display is intact. The script of what will be displayed is about to be rewritten. In the late 1880s, inside the Vanderbilt brownstone at 1660 Fifth Avenue, young Consuelo writes of being laced into a steel posture brace, the device biting into her shoulders as she practices standing correctly before a long mirror. Her education, as she recalls in The Glitter and the Gold, mixes languages, music, and charitable visits with strict discipline. Each afternoon, she writes a stack of thank you notes in a careful hand while her mother inspects the looping V's of Vanderbilt. A governess records the hours in a neat ledger. Etiquette writers praise such training as the foundation of a graceful life. Alva is doing what her world rewards, preparing a daughter for spectacle, court presentations, state dinners, the scrutiny of European courts. The micro-rituals reinforce the lesson. Straighten your back, adjust your gloves, never show strain. Years later, when suffragists debate how respectable a woman can be while marching in the streets, this training in controlled comportment will be one of Alva's unexpected political tools. The stiff brace and the soft kid gloves teach the same early lesson, that a woman's body is, first of all, a performance. By 1903, Consuelo wrote from Blenheim Palace of endless house parties and formal dinners, her days filled with seating plans and social calculations. The Duchess's notebooks list guests that include Edward VII, Winston Churchill, and European royals. Here, the education drilled into her on Fifth Avenue becomes visible as a kind of diplomatic weapon. She must remember titles, manage egos, move conversations away from controversy. She writes of British noblewomen denied serious schooling, expected to know just enough to be decorative. Her own more rigorous training marks her as an outsider, but also gives her leverage. In the official photographs, she stands in Worth gowns, gloved and composed. In the text of The Glitter and the Gold, we glimpse the fatigue behind the posture, the sense of a self narrowed to hostess and ornament. These pages, read decades later by historians, will help reframe the success of such marriages, not as fairy tales, but as case studies in how education can be turned toward either emancipation or further constraint. In the Great Gallery at Blenheim, the girl trained to please a drawing room now manages an empire of expectations. When Oliver H.P. Belmont died in 1908 at the couple's country estate Brookholt on Long Island, Alva was 45. The obituary notices in New York papers focus on his horses, his club memberships, his connections to the Belmont banking family. Widowed again, Alva's role, by precedent, should contract. Mourning veils, reduced social life, quiet benefactions. Instead, suffrage historians note that she dedicated her life to women's causes after Oliver's death, supporting garment workers' strikes and beginning to fund suffrage headquarters. We see her through a documentary lens at Marble House the following year, turning her attention from menu cards to meeting agendas. On a desk once used for planning balls lies draft stationery for the Political Equality Association, the organization she founded in 1909. She still adjusts her gloves before stepping into a room, but now the room may be a union hall, not merely a drawing room. Formality becomes a bridge between her world and those of the working women she intends to address. With Belmont gone, the same will that forced a duchess into being begins to turn outward, toward law and legislation. In 1909, suffrage newsletters recorded a practical act with vast symbolic weight. Alva Belmont rented an entire floor in a new office building at 505 Fifth Avenue, offering free headquarters to both the New York State Association and the National Press Bureau. Visitors recall a continuous stream of women, teachers, stenographers, Club women, climbing the stairs past commercial tenants into rooms hung with maps of assembly districts and charts of legislative votes. The history of woman suffrage notes that the movement received a strong impulse from this central office, financed and furnished by Belmont. Here, education takes a new form. Instead of French verbs, volunteers memorize talking points. Instead of courtesies, they rehearse floor speeches. In one recollection, Belmont circulates among them, offering both strategy and comfort. A later writer records her exhortation to a tired worker. Just pray to God, she will help you. The gloved hand now points to precinct maps and balance sheets. Fifth Avenue, once the parade route of carriages, is now the address of a new kind of training school for political citizenship. On the evening of 25 October 1909, Carnegie Hall filled for a mass meeting in honor of Emmeline Pankhurst, organized by the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women. Programs preserved in the Carnegie Hall archives list speakers including Harriet Stanton Blatch, Dr. Anna Howard Shaw, and Pankhurst herself. The crowd spills into the corridors. Platform tickets and buttons stamped in suffrage colors survive as artifacts. From Pankhurst's own memoir, we hear the line with which she begins, "I am what you call a hooligan," a phrase greeted, she writes, with a wave of laughter. In contemporary accounts, Alva Belmont's presence is not always foregrounded, but her financial and organizational support for such events is well documented. Watching from a box, adjusting her gloves as applause echoes off the hall's carved plaster, she can see a different version of female performance, still on a stage, still under lights, but speaking not for a family or a title, but for a cause. The etiquette of the salon meets the militancy of British suffragettes, and something in Alva's idea of respectability quietly shifts. By 1921, the glamorous Marlborough marriage was over. Consuelo and the Duke have been separated since 1906. Divorce is followed by an annulment granted on the grounds of coercion. Press accounts note an extraordinary fact. Alva Belmont testifies that she forced her daughter into the union. We do not have a stenographic transcript of Alva's exact words, but the result is clear. The church declares the marriage sacramentally void. In effect, the woman who once manipulated the architecture of marriage to secure status now uses the architecture of law to name that manipulation and undo its spiritual legitimacy. In admitting her own guilt, Alva steps more fully into the politics of women's autonomy, the right not only to marry, but to say no. We rewind to July 1914, back to Marble House, now repurposed. On 8 July, Alva convened what newspapers call a Conference of Great Women on her Newport grounds, under the banner of the Political Equality Association and in alliance with the Congressional Union for Woman Suffrage. Photographs preserved in suffrage collections show Alva Belmont and Consuelo, Duchess of Marlborough, standing side by side on the terrace, banners draped from the balcony. The house, once closed to the public, now admits paying guests. Proceeds from tours and luncheons go directly to suffrage work. On tables in the great tent, tea is served on china Alva has commissioned. Each plate emblazoned votes for women, pieces that survive today in museum collections. The rituals are recognizably those of high society. Place cards, floral arrangements, carefully managed guest lists, but the choreography now serves a movement. Grace, here, is not merely decorative. It is tactical. From the terrace, Marble House still looks like a palace of obedience. Under the striped tent, it sounds like a training ground for dissent. On 10th of January 1917, the National Woman's Party began picketing the White House, the silent sentinels holding banners asking President Wilson, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" Alva herself does not stand on the sidewalk day after day, but her role is written into organizational minutes and financial records. By this time, she had merged her Political Equality Association into Alice Paul's Congressional Union, advocated the strategy of holding the party in power responsible, and funded headquarters and bail for arrested picketers. A few years later, she purchased a historic brick house on Capitol Hill, soon known as the Alva Belmont House, and now the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument, to serve as the NWP's permanent base. In photographs of strategy meetings, she appears in the background, impeccably dressed, gloved, seated at a table scattered with petitions and telegrams. The woman once judged for divorcing Vanderbilt is now underwriting challenges to a sitting president. On 18th of August 1920, Tennessee's ratification of the 19th Amendment finally secured women's suffrage nationwide. At National Woman's Party headquarters in Washington, the House Alva's money helped secure. Banners are unfurled, photographs taken, speeches recorded in press accounts and organizational bulletins. Alva Belmont's role as primary benefactor is acknowledged in contemporary summaries. She has financed parades, publications, offices, and legal campaigns. In 1921, she became president of the NWP, presiding until her death. Yet she takes an idiosyncratic stance, vowing that she will not cast a ballot herself until a woman is nominated for the presidency, preferring to fight for an equal rights amendment and international reforms. In the 1920s, much of her work shifted to France, where she founded an international feminist committee. The gloves remain. So does the taste for marble interiors. But the meaning of both has altered. She has helped win the vote, yet refuses to use it, not out of apathy, but as a pointed critique of how incomplete the victory remains. On 26 January 1933, Alva Erskine Smith Vanderbilt Belmont died in Ujo, Paris. Her funeral was held soon after at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in New York, the same sanctuary where Consuelo's wedding once drew crowds. Press reports linger on two details. First, the pallbearers are all women, leaders of the National Woman's Party. Second, her coffin is draped with a banner bearing Susan B. Anthony's words, "Failure is impossible." At the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument in Washington today, visitors can see photographs of Alva speaking at the dedication, her gloved hand resting on the podium. At Marble House in Newport, tours now point out the Votes for Women tea set and the terrace where mother and daughter addressed the 1914 conference. The girl who once adjusted gloves in fear of misstepping before Mrs. Astor became a woman who used that same ritual to steady herself before a different tribunal. Histories. The film returns, in closing, to a quiet shot, the Marble House dining room after visiting hours. On a velvet-lined shelf behind glass, a single glove lies beside a Votes for Women cup and saucer. No voice explains them. The objects, like the life that handled them, sit precisely between glitter and gold, between beauty and the cost of wielding it.